The grill hissed, a low, contented sound that was music to Alex's ears. It was a perfect Saturday. The sun, a soft golden orb in the late afternoon sky, cast long, lazy shadows across the manicured lawn. The air, thick with the scent of hickory smoke and simmering barbecue sauce, hummed with the easy laughter of his closest friends. Maya, his wife, was arranging a platter of vibrant, crisp vegetables on the patio table, her movements fluid and calm. His best friend, Sam, was holding court by the drinks cooler, regaling their small group with a story about a disastrous fishing trip. This was it. The moment he had been working toward for weeks. The final house payment had gone through, the last vestiges of the old owner's neglect scrubbed clean. This was the first real gathering in their new home, a housewarming, a celebration of a new chapter. He felt the tension of the last few months, the stress of moving, the endless paperwork, the sheer exhaustion of it all, slowly bleed out of him. He flipped the burgers on the grill, a spatula in his hand, a beer-fueled smile on his face. The first disruption came not as a sound, but as an unsettling stillness. The laughter died down, the hum of conversation ceased. Alex looked up from the grill to see a figure standing at the edge of his property line, a woman with a severe bob and a face pinched into an expression of profound disapproval. It was Carol, their next-door neighbor. He had met her exactly once, a week prior, when she had pointedly informed him of the neighborhood's bylaws, none of which, she noted, he seemed to be following. "Is there a problem, Carol?" Alex asked, trying to keep the friendly warmth in his voice. The friendly facade felt paper-thin, a shield against the palpable animosity radiating from her. She didn't answer him directly. Instead, her gaze swept over his yard, taking in the small inflatable pool where two of his friend's kids were splashing, the portable speaker playing a soft indie playlist, the very existence of the grill. Her eyes, magnified by her glasses, were like tiny, hard stones of judgment. "The smoke," she said, her voice a reedy, grating whisper that managed to carry across the expanse of grass. "It's an appalling amount of smoke. You're polluting the entire neighborhood." Alex glanced at the thin, almost imperceptible wisp of smoke rising from the grill. He looked at Maya, who just shook her head, a silent warning to stay calm. "It's a BBQ, Carol. I'm just grilling some burgers. It'll be done in a few minutes." "It's more than just the smoke," she continued, stepping onto his lawn, "a violation of the unspoken boundary. It's the noise. That dreadful music. The people. This is not a public park. This is a quiet, respectable neighborhood." Her gaze lingered on Sam, a man who, with his beard and faded band t-shirt, probably didn't fit her narrow definition of respectable. Sam, sensing the hostility, just offered her a slow, deliberate wave and a wry grin. "Hi there, neighbor." Carol's lips thinned into a razor-sharp line. "You think this is a joke?" she snapped, her voice rising. "I've tolerated your shenanigans for a week. I've been patient, but this is the final straw. This is a public disturbance. I'm calling the police." She pulled a gleaming smartphone from the pocket of her sensible slacks, her thumb hovering over the screen. "Carol, don't be ridiculous," Maya said, stepping forward. "It's a small, private gathering. We'll be done by 9. Please, just let us enjoy ourselves." "Too late," Carol said, her face a mask of triumphant fury. "The number is already dialed. I tried to handle this like a civilized person, but you people clearly don't understand reason. The authorities will. They'll explain the rules of conduct to you." Alex felt his blood run cold. It wasn't about the fine, not really. It was the principle of it. The unjust, petty vindictiveness of a person who seemed to derive pleasure from making others miserable. He imagined the officers arriving, the questions, the humiliation of being reported by his neighbor, the celebration dissolving into a tense, embarrassing confrontation. They waited. The easy chatter had completely evaporated. Sam turned off the music. The only sound was the low sizzle of the burgers and the chirping of crickets. The silence was heavy, oppressive, a thick blanket of anxiety. Alex felt his stomach tighten into a knot. He had worked so hard to make this day perfect, and now it was about to be ruined by a woman with an axe to grind. Then a faint, high-pitched wail broke the silence, Faint at first, a distant ghost, but it grew and grew until it was a solid, undeniable shriek. A police siren. It wasn't an empty threat. She had actually done it. The police cruiser pulled up slowly, its red and blue lights painting the street in a silent, strobing kaleidoscope. Two officers emerged, their uniforms crisp and their expressions unreadable. The first, a woman with a sharp, no-nonsense air, was Officer Miller. The second, a younger, weary-looking man, was Officer Davis. They approached the property, their gazes sweeping the scene. Carol, emboldened by their presence, hurried to meet them. She launched into a breathless, heavily embellished account of her suffering, the incessant noise, the toxic smoke, the disreputable crowd. Alex watched, his hands clenched around the spatula, his jaw tight. Officer Miller held up a hand, a gesture of quiet command. "We hear you, ma'am. Let's get the other side of the story." She and Officer Davis walked past Carol, who stood behind them, arms crossed, a smug smile on her face. They stopped a few feet from Alex. "Sir," Officer Miller began, her voice even and detached, "we received a complaint about a noise ordinance violation and excessive smoke. Can you confirm the nature of your gathering?" "It's a housewarming, officer," Alex said, his voice calmer than he felt. "A few friends. The music was soft, and as you can see, the smoke is minimal. We were just enjoying some burgers." Officer Davis's gaze drifted from the grill to the house, and then to the line of dense, overgrown bushes that separated Alex's property from a thick patch of undeveloped woods. His eyes narrowed slightly. He seemed to be looking at something beyond the property line. Carol, impatient with the lack of immediate consequences for Alex, stepped forward. "Officer, the smoke is a persistent problem. And the children. They're screaming, making a racket. This is a peaceful community and people have a right to—" "Ma'am, we're handling it," Officer Miller cut in, a hint of steel in her tone. She was clearly used to dealing with people like Carol. She turned back to Alex. "I'm going to need to see some ID. We'll have to write up a warning." The humiliation washed over Alex in a hot wave. A warning. On the first day. This was a scar on their record, a black mark that Carol would use against him for years. He felt his defiance rise. For what exactly? For having a barbecue on my own property? For a complaint of public disturbance, Officer Miller said, her tone hardening. "It's a warning, sir. We're not fining you. Just take it down a notch." Just as Alex was about to argue to refuse to be treated like a criminal for grilling burgers, Officer Davis stiffened. His body went rigid, his hand subtly moving toward his sidearm. His eyes were fixed on the bushes. "You see something, Davis?" Miller asked, following his gaze. There was a sound then. A low, viscous rustle, not the dry rustle of a squirrel or a stray cat, but something heavy and deliberate. A sound that shouldn't have been there. Something was moving through the undergrowth, something big. A flicker of movement caught the dying light. A patch of skin, not fur, not feather. A mosaic of scales, the color of wet earth and dry leaves. The pattern was intricate, almost hypnotic. It was a solid, rippling mass of muscle. Alex's breath hitched. He wasn't looking at a squirrel. He was looking at a coil of something vast, something impossibly large. Officer Miller's hand went to her holster. The warning, the barbecue, the insufferable neighbor, all of it vanished, replaced by a singular primal focus. Her face, which had been impassive a moment before, was now a mask of cold, professional shock. The head emerged from the foliage, its blunt, powerful snout tasting the air. Its eyes, unblinking black beads, fixed on the group. It was a python, a behemoth, its body as thick as a man's thigh. It was a creature that belonged in a zoo, not at the edge of his backyard. Carol, standing a few feet behind them, oblivious, continued her harangue. "What are you looking at? I told you, he's a menace. Now, are you going to do something or not?" Officer Davis didn't answer. He didn't even look at her. His gaze was locked on the serpent, and he slowly, deliberately drew his weapon. The tables had turned. The scales had tipped. The petty conflict, huh? The standoff was a tableau of frozen terror. Officer Davis, his stance wide and low, held his firearm steady, a beacon of cold steel against the fading light. Officer Miller, her hand still on her holster, had her eyes fixed on the point where the creature's head emerged. Her radio crackled with a forgotten chatter, a distant noise swallowed by the profound silence of the yard. The head of the python was a blunt, powerful wedge. It didn't belong in a suburban backyard. It belonged in the primordial darkness of a documentary. Its black, unblinking eyes set low on its head weren't cruel or malicious. They were simply vacant, an empty, predatory calm. A flick of its forked tongue tasted the molecules of the air, and a shudder ran down Alex's spine. The creature was surveying its new environment. "It's a Burmese," Officer Davis muttered, his voice a low, gravelly whisper. "Must have been someone's pet. Got out." Carol, who had been silenced for a blessed moment, chose that exact instant to break the spell. She saw the police, their focus so completely shifted from her righteous indignation, and she took it as a personal affront. "What are you looking at? Are you going to do something or not?" "Arrest them!" "They're still a public menace." The words seemed to trigger something. The python, which had been slowly surveying the adults, shifted its gaze. Its head turned with a slow, deliberate grace, bypassing Alex, Maya, the two officers, and Carol. It settled on a new target. The inflatable pool, the two children. A collective gasp went up from Alex's friends. Maya's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a scream. The python had sensed them, not as a threat, but as a source of something. The children, unaware of the lurking danger, were still laughing, still splashing, their innocent joy a terrifying contrast to the silent predator. "Kids! Get out of the pool! Now!" Alex screamed, his voice raw with a sudden, all-encompassing panic. He took a single, instinctual step forward, his spatula clattering to the ground. The python began to move. Its immense body, a thick, muscular rope of patterned scales, slithered free of the bushes. It was longer than a car, heavier than a grown man. The ground itself seemed to ripple under its weight. The air filled with the horrible scraping sound of scales against the grass, a noise that sounded like sandpaper on bone. Officer Miller finally tore her gaze from the serpent and looked at Alex. Her eyes were wide with a desperate, unspoken warning. "Don't engage. Don't get closer." But Alex's world had narrowed to one singular point, the two small, defenseless forms in the pool. "Get out." Maya shrieked, her voice cracking with terror. She started running toward the pool, her feet slipping on the wet grass. The other adults, their barbecue-fueled contentment shattered, scrambled to follow her. Carol watched, her face a mask of slow, dawning horror. She saw the snake, not as an abstract concept, but as a living, breathing, terrifying reality. The venomous smugness drained from her face, leaving it pale and slack. "Oh my God," she whispered, the words barely audible. "What is that?" "What have you done?" Her question was a ridiculous anachronism in the face of the encroaching horror, but no one had time to answer. The python was moving faster now, its purpose clear. It wasn't hunting, not in the traditional sense, but it was curious. It was a massive living force of nature, and it was headed straight for the most vulnerable targets. Officer Miller's hand came fully away from her holster. "Davis, get animal control on the line. This is not a situation for a firearm." She knew a bullet could either enrage the creature or miss, hitting one of the kids. It was a risk she was not willing to take. Her voice, though calm, was strained with urgency. "Everyone get inside the house, now!" The children, their playful splashes turning into frantic, confused movements, finally understood. They scrambled from the pool, their little legs pumping as they sprinted toward their parents. The youngest, a boy of about 4, tripped, falling face first onto the grass. His cries were thin and panicked. The python, alerted by the sudden noise and movement, paused. Its head swung to the side and its gaze fixed on the fallen child. The motion was unnervingly swift for such a massive creature. Alex, who was running at a full sprint toward the boy, felt his heart pound against his ribs. He was too far away. The snake was closer. Sam, his fishing trip story completely forgotten, was standing by the grill. He saw the child fall, saw the snake turn. His mind, trained by years of troubleshooting and quick fixes, saw the problem and the solution in a single, terrifying instant. The tongs, the charcoal bag. Without a second thought, He grabbed the bag of charcoal. "Hey!" he yelled, his voice cracking. He hurled the 50-pound bag of briquettes directly at the snake's head. The thud was sickening. The bag burst on impact, a cloud of black dust erupting in the air, but the python's skull was like a rock. The bag simply deflected off its head, its contents raining down over the grass. The action didn't harm the creature, but it got its attention. The snake's head snapped away from the boy, its attention now fully on the new, noisy aggressor. Sam. The boy, startled and terrified, managed to get up and bolt into his mother's arms. The python, however, had found a new focal point. It was no longer interested in the children. It was interested in the man who had hit it. Its body, a living testament to silent power, coiled and tensed. The sound of its movement was now a rapid, relentless shriek as it tore through the grass, a blur of scales and muscle. It was a predator now, no longer a curious wanderer. It was hurt, and it was angry. Sam, his face pale, stood frozen. He had just saved the children, but he had put himself in the serpent's crosshairs. The distance between him and the python was closing with horrifying speed, and Officer Miller, still with her phone pressed to her ear, could only watch as the python, a force of nature that had just ignored 2 armed police officers, was now hurtling toward the man who had saved the day. This time, the justice wasn't for Carol. The karma wasn't for Alex. The shock was the silent, deadly inevitability of the python's charge, and the terrifying realization that one simple act of heroism had turned a suburban barbecue into a death match. The python's charge was a blur of scaled muscle, a locomotive of primeval fury. The sound of its movement was a horrifying crescendo, a relentless, scraping shriek of dry scales tearing through grass. Sam, frozen for a heartbeat, saw its blunt head, the size of a dinner plate, hurtling toward him. Its mouth, a dark cavity, was unhinged in a silent promise of overwhelming force. He didn't think. He reacted. His hands, still slick from gripping the charcoal bag, shot out to grab the one thing between him and the beast, the Weber grill. He shoved it with all his might, a desperate, clumsy shove. The grill, a solid, heavy orb of hot metal, tipped over with a metallic shriek. It didn't stop the python, but it did force the creature to alter its path. The snake's head swiped to the side, a fraction of a second too late, and its powerful body slammed into the grill with a sickening thud. The coals, still glowing red-hot, rained down onto the lawn, a scattered firestorm of sparks and embers. The heat didn't seem to bother the python, but the sudden obstacle threw off its momentum. It coiled, an immense living spring, its head whipping around to locate Sam, who had stumbled backward, tripping over a lawn chair. The chair clattered to the ground, a cheap plastic sound swallowed by the guttural hiss that now emanated from the snake's throat. It was no longer a silent predator. It was enraged. "Get back! Get inside!" Officer Miller yelled, her voice cutting through the panic. But her words were a distant, useless echo. Alex, who had been running towards the house, skidded to a stop. His wife, Maya, was screaming his name from the doorway, her hands frantically waving him back. But he couldn't move. He watched as his best friend, his brother, was stalked by a monster that had crashed their party. Every primal instinct screamed at him to run, but a deeper, more profound loyalty held him rooted to the spot. His eyes swept the chaotic scene, the overturned grill, the scattered coals, the beer cooler lying on its side, leaking water. He saw the fire extinguisher, a bright red canister by the back door, and he grabbed it without a second thought. It was a useless weapon against such a creature, he knew, but it was all he had. Meanwhile, Officer Davis, his firearm still lowered, was talking frantically into his radio. "Animal control, we have a code 9. Repeat, a code 9. Large python," confirmed Burmese. "It's hostile. We have a civilian engaging. Need a tranquilizer unit now? Our location is..." The rest was lost as his voice became a strangled plea. The cavalry was a world away. Carol stood frozen by the front lawn, a statue of abject terror. The smug satisfaction that had been plastered on her face was gone, replaced by a ghastly, wide-eyed stare. Her mouth was open, but no sound came out. The things she had set in motion, the authorities she had summoned, were now a part of the chaos. She had wanted to teach them a lesson about rules, But the universe had decided to teach her a lesson about consequences. The python, having righted itself, moved with a fluid grace that defied its size. It didn't charge this time. It slithered, a silent, deadly river of scales flowing across the lawn toward Sam. Sam scrambled backward, crab walking away from the snake's hypnotic advance. He reached the edge of the patio, his back hitting the concrete wall of the house. He was cornered. Alex, fire extinguisher in hand, ran forward. "Hey!" he bellowed, a desperate guttural sound. He aimed the extinguisher at the python's head and squeezed the trigger. A jet of white pressurized foam erupted from the nozzle. It hit the snake's head with a soft hiss, obscuring its vision. The python, surprised by the sudden cold blindness, flinched. Its head jerked back, and it began to strike blindly at the air, its movements now erratic and confused. This was their chance. "Sam, get up! Run!" Alex screamed. Sam, his legs tangled, managed to untangle himself. He lunged to his feet and sprinted for the open back door, his lungs burning with exertion. Maya reached out and pulled him inside, slamming the sliding glass door shut just as the python, its vision cleared, lunged forward and slammed its snout against the glass with a jarring thud. The entire frame rattled. They were safe, for now, but the python was still outside. Its head was pressed against the glass, its unblinking eyes staring in at them. It was a monstrous, terrifying image. It hadn't forgotten them. It was waiting. Officer Miller, who had been moving slowly to the side, saw the opportunity. The snake was distracted, its attention on the house. She looked at Officer Davis, then at the snake, and then at Alex's overturned grill. An idea half-formed and insane flashed in her eyes. It was reckless. It was dangerous. It was their only shot. She ran toward the grill, ignoring the scattered embers. Officer Davis, seeing the wild resolve in her eyes, didn't question it. He ran with her. They grabbed the two ends of the grill's handle, the metal still hot enough to burn. "On 3, Miller said, her voice a tense whisper. 1, 2, 3. They lifted the grill, still sizzling, still reeking of smoke and barbecue, and with a shared desperate effort they hurled it. It didn't land on the snake. Instead, it landed with a loud ringing crash directly on the thick, sprawling tail section of the python. The sound was a mix of clattering metal and something softer, more visceral. The python, its tail pinned, thrashed wildly, its body convulsing in a violent, furious dance. The grill, now wedged beneath its immense weight, held it fast. It was a temporary victory, a fragile one. The python was contained but not defeated. Its head, now a blur of fury, snapped and struck at the air, its body twisting and coiling in a desperate attempt to free its tail. The situation had gone from a petty neighborhood dispute to a battle against an apex predator. The police, summoned for a noise complaint, were now acting as impromptu animal wranglers, and their only tool was a barbecue grill. The irony was so profound it was almost comical, but no one was laughing. The real turning point wasn't the charcoal bag or the fire extinguisher or the grill. It was the moment Officer Davis's radio, silent for minutes, crackled back to life. A calm professional voice spoke from the static. "Animal control, we're 2 minutes out. Is the target secured?" Officer Miller, looking at the writhing, furious python and the flimsy grill barely holding it down, had to make a choice. A choice that could determine whether she and her partner walked away with a story, or in a body bag. "Negative," she said into the radio, her voice strained but steady. "Target is not secured. I repeat, target is not secured. And it just bit me." Her words were a stark, terrifying lie. A strategic move born of desperation and a deep understanding of protocol. Because she knew, with a bone-deep certainty, that if they told animal control the truth, that the situation was contained but not secured, the tranquilizer unit would take its time. But if they thought an officer had been injured, they would arrive with an urgency that might just be their only hope. The risk of the lie was as great as the risk of the python. She had just escalated the situation beyond anything they could have imagined. And the consequences, for all of them, were about to become very real. Officer Miller's lie hung in the air, a final, desperate card played in a game of life and death. The words, "and it just bit me," were a punch in the gut to Officer Davis, who stared at her in disbelief before his eyes flicked back to the radio clutched in her hand. The silence from the dispatcher was a heavy, pregnant pause, broken only by the enraged thrashing of the python as it fought to free its tail from the makeshift vise of the grill. "Copy that. Miller!" The dispatcher's voice returned, now sharp with urgency. "Unit is code 3, 2 minutes out. ETA is less than 1. Stand by." Miller let out a small, shaky breath. The lie was a calculated risk. A man-down call would get a full-blown emergency response, but a bitten officer would summon the specialized unit, the one with the tranquilizers and the expertise, with a ferocity that a general distress call never would. She had bought them seconds, and seconds were all they had. "Are you insane?" Davis hissed, his eyes wide. He was not just her partner, but her friend. He knew what a lie like that could do to a career, let alone the potential consequences if she was found out. "It's a python." "Davis," she said, her voice low and strained, her gaze never leaving the writhing beast. "You think they'd send a code 3 for a civilian? We needed them here now. That thing is going to tear itself free." They watched, powerless, as the python's movements grew more violent. Its powerful head, a blur of striking fury, hammered against the ground. The tail, pinned under the immense weight of the grill, was a testament to the creature's unyielding strength. The metal groaned, the plastic wheels on the grill's legs cracking under the pressure. The fight had been elevated from a petty domestic squabble to a battle against an animal of immense power and rage. Inside the house, Alex, Maya, and Sam watched from behind the safety of the sliding glass door. The once bright, cheerful living room was now a darkened box of anxiety, lit only by the strobing flashes of the police cruiser's lights. The friends and their children, gathered in a tight, terrified huddle, watched in petrified silence. They had seen the snake's advance, and they had seen Officer Miller's desperate, split-second action. They couldn't hear the lie, but they understood the gravity of the situation. This was no longer a party. It was a siege. And Carol, the instigator of this nightmare, stood on the lawn alone and forgotten. The smug triumph was gone, replaced by a deep-seated reptilian terror. She had wanted to teach them a lesson about rules, but the universe had decided to teach her a lesson about chaos. Her hands were clasped in front of her, trembling. She looked from the police to the python, and back to the police, her face a pale, horrified mask. She had started a fire, and now it was a raging inferno, and she was trapped in its heat. Then, a new sound cut through the chaos. A different siren, lower in tone, less shrill. A large, white, unmarked van with animal control stenciled on the side came to a screeching halt on the street, blocking off the end of the block. Two figures in dark professional uniforms, unlike the police, emerged with a sense of urgent, measured purpose. One carried a long-barreled rifle, a tranquilizer gun, and the other a large, coiled rope snare. They were not looking at Alex's house. Their eyes were on Miller and Davis, their posture communicating a silent urgency. One of them, a man with a weathered face, yelled over the sound of the python's thrashing. "Officer down?" Miller's heart was pounding. The lie was exposed, but she had to sell it. "I'm fine, sir. The snake is contained at the tail." "It's hostile and agitated," she yelled back, gesturing to the thrashing creature. The animal control officers didn't question her. They didn't have time. They saw the sheer size of the python and the fragile nature of its containment. They moved with a terrifying, practiced efficiency. One of them, a woman, went to the side of the house, staying out of the python's direct line of sight. The man, a calm, steady presence, leveled the tranquilizer gun. The python, sensing the new arrivals, shifted its focus. Its head still thrashing swiveled wildly. It was a creature of instinct, and it understood a new threat had arrived. It lunged, not at Miller or Davis, but at the empty space between them. It was a feint, a test. It was looking for an opening. The man from animal control didn't hesitate. He took a single, controlled breath, his finger tightening on the trigger. The shot was a quiet thwip, a soft pop that was swallowed by the night. A small dart, tipped with a fluorescent orange marker, embedded itself just below the python's jawline. For a moment, nothing happened. The python continued to thrash, its muscles coiling and uncoiling with a terrifying strength. Then the first signs of the tranquilizer took hold. The frantic, violent movements began to slow. The thrashing became a sluggish, lazy motion. The hiss was no longer a sound of rage, but a low, exhausted sigh. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, the immense body of the snake went limp. Its head, once a powerful weapon, sagged to the ground. Its eyes, still empty, slowly glazed over. The silence that followed was a physical entity, a vacuum that sucked all the tension and noise from the air. The only sounds were the distant sirens of the approaching police backup and the ragged, shuddering breaths of the onlookers. The animal control team went to work. They expertly freed the python's tail from the grill. The grill, now bent and charred, was a testament to its struggle. They worked with an almost scientific detachment, measuring the snake. It was over 16 feet long, and carefully wrapping its body in a canvas bag. They lifted it, a heavy, dead weight, and carried it to their van. As they passed, the weathered-faced man gave Miller a single, knowing look. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. The lie had worked, and then, the moment of truth, the police backup arrived. 3 more cruisers, a sergeant, and a captain. The scene was now a full-blown emergency. The captain, a large man with a thick mustache, walked over to Miller and Davis, his expression a mixture of confusion and concern. "Miller, Davis, what the hell is going on? We got a report you were down." Miller, her face pale, looked at her captain. She knew this was the moment. The lie had been necessary to save lives, but now it was a potential career ender. But before she could speak, Carol, the instigator of it all, stumbled forward, her face tear-stained and ashen. She looked at Alex, at the grill, at the police captain. She saw the full scale of the catastrophe she had caused. "It was my fault," she whispered, her voice a reedy, choked gasp. "It was all my fault. I called them. I called the police for a noise complaint, and that thing came out of his woods." She pointed a shaking finger at the now empty bushes. The captain's gaze settled on her. "Ma'am, a call for a noise complaint? You called 911 for a barbecue? Do you understand what kind of resources that diverts?" His voice was a low, dangerous rumble. He wasn't angry. He was professionally infuriated. Carol shook her head, unable to form words. She had called for order and had unleashed chaos. She had wanted to make a point and had nearly gotten people killed. And now, the police, the very authority she had summoned, were looking at her not as a victim, but as the source of the problem. Her victory was a hollow, bitter thing. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to get your information," the captain said, his voice flat and authoritative. "Filing a false report and making an emergency call for a non-emergency situation, that's a serious offense. We'll be in touch." The karma wasn't the snake. It was the captain. It was the realization that she had gotten exactly what she wanted. The police at Alex's house, a formal reprimand, a victory, but the cost had been so much higher than she could have ever imagined. The justice was that the warning was for her, not for him, and the bitter irony was that she had been the one to call it down upon herself. The street was a carnival of flashing lights, a morbid spectacle drawing neighbors from their homes and turning the quiet suburban cul-de-sac into a stage. The air, thick with the lingering scent of barbecue smoke, was now tinged with the sterile tang of officialdom and the faint, earthy smell of reptile. Police officers and animal control personnel moved with a quiet, practiced professionalism that seemed almost out of place against the backdrop of an overturned grill and a scattering of half-eaten hot dogs. The captain, a man whose face seemed permanently etched with the fatigue of 1,000 emergencies, stood before Miller and Davis. He didn't need a report to understand the gravity of the situation. The scene spoke for itself. He saw the bent grill, the flattened grass, and the wide-eyed terror still lingering on the faces of the people huddled behind the sliding glass door. "Miller," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "I just heard a report that you were bitten. Yet you're standing here, fine, explain." Her heart was a drum in her chest. The lie, which had felt like a lifeline moments ago, now felt like a noose. She looked at Davis, who gave her a single, almost imperceptible shake of his head. He was telling her to back down, to be honest. But honesty, she knew, would lead to disciplinary action, a formal reprimand that could stall her career for years. Sir, in the heat of the moment, with the animal actively hostile and charging, my radio transmission was unclear. I was attempting to convey that the target had been engaged by a person, not that I was injured. It was a well-crafted half-truth, but a lie nonetheless. The captain's eyes, sharp and intelligent, narrowed. He knew she was lying. He had heard her voice. He knew the subtle nuances of a distress call. He was about to speak, about to tear into her, when a voice from behind them, thin and reedy, cut through the tension. "It was my fault," Carol whispered, her voice a reedy, choked gasp. She had walked to the center of the lawn, a woman alone in a sea of flashing lights and concerned strangers. The smug, venomous satisfaction that had defined her for years was gone, replaced by a hollow, vacant look. "I called them. I called the police for a noise complaint and that thing came out of his woods." The captain's gaze snapped to her. He didn't know her, but he knew her type. He had seen countless Karens who had used 911 as a weapon of petty revenge. But he had never seen one whose actions had led to a life-or-death situation. "Ma'am," he said, his voice now flat, devoid of emotion. "A call for a noise complaint? You called 911 and claimed a public disturbance because of a barbecue? Do you understand what kind of resources that diverts from actual emergencies?" Carol, unable to form words, could only shake her head, her eyes welling with tears. She had wanted to win, but had only succeeded in losing everything. Her neighbors, who had watched the entire spectacle unfold, now looked at her not with sympathy, but with cold, hard judgment. The whispered conversations, the pointing fingers. It was all for her. Her victory was a public shaming that no amount of righteous indignation could erase. The captain turned back to Miller and Davis. He looked at the two of them, then at the animal control van where the immense canvas-wrapped python was being loaded. He saw the danger, the chaos, the split-second decisions that had to be made. He saw the truth, not just in Miller's eyes, but in the physical reality of the situation. He saw that her lie, however reckless, had been the only thing that had worked. "Get your report to me in the morning," he said, his voice quiet, almost a whisper. He didn't mention the radio transmission, the lie, or the officer down call. It was a silent pardon, an unspoken acknowledgement that in the fog of war, sometimes the rules had to be bent to save lives. It was the only justice they would receive, and it was enough. He then turned his attention back to Carol, his face a mask of professional duty. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to get your information. And you can expect a visit from the district attorney's office. Filing a false report and making an emergency call for a non-emergency situation. That's a serious offense. We'll be in touch." The karma wasn't the snake. It was the captain. It was the crushing weight of legal consequences. It was the realization that the system she had so blindly believed in was now coming for her. The sirens faded into the distance. The flashing lights of the police cars and the animal control van slowly disappeared around the corner. The street was plunged back into a surreal quiet, the kind of stillness that only follows a great noise. Alex and Sam walked out onto the lawn, the silence a physical presence between them. The yard was a battlefield of their recent past. The overturned grill, the scattered coals, the empty spot where the python had been. They didn't speak. There was nothing to say. The anger, the frustration, and the fear had been replaced by a profound, exhausted relief. Alex looked at his friend, at the man who had thrown himself in harm's way for his children. "You're an idiot," Alex said, his voice thick with emotion. Sam just laughed, a low, shaky sound. "Yeah, well, someone had to do something." He looked at the grill, then at Alex, then at the house where their families were waiting. "I guess we're not having any more hot dogs tonight." The friends, still shaken, emerged from the house, gathering around the two men. They didn't talk about the snake or Carol. They talked about the kids, about how fast they had run, about how lucky they were. They were no longer just friends. They were survivors. The barbecue was over. The charcoal was cold. The music was silent. But as Alex looked at his wife, at his kids, and at his friends, he felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the grill. The python was gone, and so was Carol's power. She had tried to poison their peace, but all she had done was create a moment they would never forget. The real story wasn't about a snake or a noise complaint. It was about how a shared danger had exposed a toxic presence in their community and had, in the end, created something unbreakable. The injustice of Carol's initial complaint had, in the most ironic and twisted way, led to a powerful and profound justice for all of them. The story of the barbecue was over, but the story of their friendship had just begun. I hope you found this conclusion satisfying. If you'd like to explore any of the characters' backstories or the aftermath of the event, I'm happy to continue the conversation.